The PlayStation 2 had over 4,000 games on it. And if you look at what actually got covered, it's a very small number. Mostly the same publishers, the same franchises. The ones that had marketing budgets and sequels people were already waiting for. What got ignored was everything else. And some of that everything else was genuinely extraordinary. Games that were taking risks, doing things mechanically or narratively that the celebrated titles weren't, that shipped into a market that simply wasn't paying attention and vanished. 20 years later, those are the ones worth talking about. 11 PS2 JRPGs that critics mostly walked past. If you already know this part of the PS2 library, some of these will feel like old wounds. If you don't, this is the list nobody made for you at the time. Legaia Dual Saga walks into a room full of turn-based JRPGs and does something none of them did. It gives you a fighting game combo system. In battle, you input directional commands to build attack sequences called arts. The right combination of directional inputs chains into a named technique. Find a new combination by experimentation and you've learned a new art. The combat is turn-based in structure but demands active input every single turn. You're thinking about sequence, about chain, about what comes next. It's the difference between selecting attack and clicking play. The world is post-apocalyptic fantasy with warring city-states and a mystical energy source called Origin that powers the world's supernatural abilities. The story is functional, a serviceable adventure that serves as scaffolding for the combat, which is where the game actually lives. I spent 40 minutes in an early dungeon just experimenting with input sequences to find combinations I hadn't discovered yet. The discovery loop in the combat is genuinely compelling in a way I didn't anticipate. But the narrative doesn't match the combat's ambition. The characters are likable but thin. If story depth is what sustains you across a JRPG, so it may not hold you the full distance. But as a mechanical idea, as a combat system that treats player engagement as mandatory rather than optional, it's one of the most original things in this part of the library. And almost nobody ever brings it up. Atelier Iris Eternal Mana was the first time Western players got to interact with the series. And they spent the next 2 decades building that series into a franchise with millions of fans worldwide. You are an alchemist searching for a legendary technique in a world where elemental spirits called mana can be bound and used in synthesis. The signature mechanic is the alchemy system, combining materials through recipes to create consumables, equipment, and key items that you actually need to progress. The loop of finding new recipes, tracking down the ingredients, and watching the result appear, then thinking about what you can now make from that, is exactly the loop they refined across every game in the series after this. The foundations are completely present in Iris 1. What surprised me was the personality. The characters are warm and distinct in ways that matter. The setting has some real meat to it. However, the first game is more traditionally structured than later Atelier games. No time management, no deadline pressure system. Players coming from the Ryza era backward will find it less mechanically complex than expected. Players coming to Atelier for the first time will find it welcoming in ways the newer games can't quite be. A franchise this beloved had to start somewhere. It started here, and it's worth knowing where that was. Level 5 made Dark Cloud 2, DQ8, and Ni no Kuni, all celebrated and remembered. Then there's Rogue Galaxy, their 2005 space pirate epic that did everything right and got roughly 1/10 of the attention. You're Jaster, a desert planet kid who gets accidentally recruited into the crew of a legendary pirate ship after being mistaken for a famous bounty hunter. The premise sounds like it writes itself, and it does, and it's wonderful. The crew is one of the best ensemble casts they ever assembled. The environments are enormous and hand-painted in a style that still holds up. The real-time battle system uses 3 active characters with combo chains, and the weapon synthesis system has you leveling individual pieces of equipment toward fusion into something more powerful. Chasing the next synthesis is its own loop within the loop. There's also the Insectron minigame, a side mode where you collect and battle insects in an entirely separate competition system. I went in for 20 minutes to see what it was, then I lost an hour. But the story can be straightforward in ways that Rogue Galaxy's visual ambition suggests it shouldn't be. The characters carry what the plot sometimes can't. If you need narrative complexity to stay in a JRPG, it may not give you enough. As a pure, I want to go on an adventure JRPG, Rogue Galaxy is one of the best the PS2 ever produced. The devs have never gotten the credit for this one they deserved.
Come on, get up!
Influencer Generations is the second and third games in one package, localized by Working Designs, largely forgotten by history, which is a real shame because the series was doing real-time tactical RPG design in ways that deserved a much larger audience. The combat plays out in real time, with AI-controlled party members you issue commands to directly. The ring system has circular menus that appear around enemies and determine your attack arc, and it's one of the most spatially interesting battle designs on PS2. Position and formations matter. Your mage standing too close to a group of actually has an impact. You feel like a commander rather than a menu selector. Both games have branching route structures where major decisions fork the plot significantly. Different paths lead to different characters, different locations, different endings. The character designs are distinctive enough that the games are immediately recognizable, and the localization is sharp and character appropriate. I found this at a used shop with no context beyond the spine. The physical release had fold-out extras I didn't expect, paid almost nothing for it, and couldn't put it down. The real-time combat will take you real adjustment time that the tutorial unfortunately doesn't fully provide. The first 2 or 3 hours are genuinely unfamiliar in ways that feel steeper than they should. 2 complete games. 1 criminally overlooked package. One of the best value plays in PS2 JRPGs if you can find it. The Judgment Ring is one of the most original combat mechanics in JRPG history, and almost nobody talks about it outside of cult circles. It's a circle with a rotating hand, like a clock face, and every attack, every spell, every special ability requires you to press a button as the hand sweeps through a specific window. Hit the narrow inner zone, and you deal bonus damage. Miss the zone entirely, and your character wastes their turn. Bosses can curse your ring, shrink the hit zones, speed up the rotation, fill the circle with damage zones that punish you for pressing it all. It turns what would be a passive menu system into something you are engaged with every single turn across a 40-hour game. That's almost impossible to pull off. Shadow Hearts Covenant pulls it off. The setting is World War I era Europe with a supernatural horror layer on top. The villain is a Rasputin-type sorcerer. The story goes places you won't see coming and earns its emotional moments without telegraphing them. I went in because someone described the Judgment Ring as a gimmick. 4 days and barely any sleep later, I was explaining the ending to someone who hadn't asked. Covenant assumes you've played the first. There's a recap, but character relationships and the emotional weight of Yuri's arc are significantly richer with that context. Track down the first game if you can. It's worth it. This is what happens when a developer makes exactly the game they want with zero concessions to commercial safety. It's extraordinary. I'm going to be completely honest with you about Drakengard. The gameplay is deliberately bad. Not accidentally bad. Not bad because they ran out of budget. Deliberately, intentionally, philosophically bad. You play as a prince who has sacrificed his voice to bond with a dragon, and who kills people with an enthusiasm the game does not frame as heroic. The ground combat is repetitive by design. Kavia wanted the act of slaughtering hundreds of enemies to feel like exactly that monotonous slaughter, not a power fantasy. The dragonflight sections are clunky. The world is gray and deliberately ugly. The characters are broken people doing terrible things, and the game does not look away. The story across 5 different endings goes places JRPG storytelling had never gone. Ending A is bleak, B is darker, and the ending unlocked by completing all the others. turns into a bullet hell rhythm game and results in a cutscene that established the entire foundation for Nier. The beloved modern franchise that redefined action RPG storytelling started here, in a deliberately unpleasant PS2 game that critics gave a 6 and walked past. I played all 5 endings over 2 weeks and felt genuinely disturbed at the end of it. I mean that as a compliment, but it's clearly not for everyone. The gameplay asks you to tolerate a lot in service of the experience, and the toleration is part of the point. If that framing doesn't land, the game won't either. But if it lands, nothing else quite feels like it. Which of these had you actually heard of before this video? Comment below, and if you can, subscribing keeps me making these.
Alright, I kicked your...
Radiata Stories has a mechanic so ambitious, it still feels a little impossible. Every NPC in the game has a daily schedule, a routine, a web of relationships with other characters, and nearly all 175 of them are recruitable to your party. Not as symbolic roster picks, as actual party members with individual stats and abilities and stories. You're playing as Jack, a new knight trying to prove himself, and you're building a party by tracking people down at their correct time and location. The game uses a day/night cycle with actual clock-driven NPC movement and befriending them. The friendship mechanic involves kicking people until they like you, which is exactly as strange as it sounds and absolutely works in context. At a specific story point, Radiata Stories asks you to choose a side, human or non-human. The second half of the game you play through depends on that choice. Different dungeons, different available party members, a structurally different experience. The branching is real and substantial. I chose the non-human path first and immediately needed to replay it for the human route. That's the sign of a branch that was actually built rather than just implied. The real-time brawler combat, though, is its weakest element. It's serviceable, not exciting. The world and its people are where Radiata Stories lives. The combat is the scaffolding you do between visiting them. Tri-Ace never made anything quite like this again, which makes it more worth finding. Nippon Ichi had just made Disgaea and basically invented a subgenre. Their follow-up took everything they'd built and made it stranger, softer, and more emotionally precise. You play as a young girl with the ability to see and interact with phantoms, spirits of the dead. She's shunned by nearly everyone because of it. Her only real companion is Ash, the phantom of a man who died protecting her parents. The story of Phantom Brave is about loneliness, resilience, and what it means to be loved by people the rest of the world can't see. This throws out the fixed grid. Instead, you confine phantom party members into objects on the battlefield, and the object you confine them into modifies their stats and abilities. Every phantom also has a turn limit. They exist in the physical world for a set number of moves before they're pulled back into the spirit realm, whether you're finished or not. That mechanic is also the story. Every battle is practice for the fleeting reality. I didn't expect to feel what I felt at the ending. It came from nowhere and stayed. There's also randomized item placement on battlefields that can put you in genuinely difficult starting positions. Some maps feel stacked against you in ways that are frustrating rather than challenging. Phantom Brave is a love story disguised as a tactical RPG. It's devastating in the best way. Before Disgaea made Nippon Ichi famous, there was La Pucelle Tactics, the game that laid nearly identical groundwork 1 year earlier and got almost no recognition for doing it. You play as Prior, a demon hunter from a holy order, in a world where dark portals are opening and releasing monsters. The tactical grid combat might feel familiar, but it does something different. Instead of just clearing enemies, you can purify the dark energy inside each portal. Redirect enough dark energy into a circular flow pattern, and you trigger a miracle, which transforms into something powerful that clears the area completely. The purification mechanic turns every map into a puzzle that defeat all enemies doesn't really capture. You're managing the battlefield differently. The The story is warm in the way their games often are, a little goofy, then quietly emotional when you're not expecting it. Pryor is one of my favorite protagonists in the company's entire lineup. Stubborn, loud, secretly more thoughtful than she lets anyone see. I played this after Disgaea and spent the whole time wondering why the gap in their reputations was this large. But the localization had rough patches, and the opening doesn't sell the game's best ideas fast enough. New players bouncing off in the first hour is a real possibility. This came before and deserved more of the credit that went to its more famous sibling. If Atelier Iris was them finding their audience, Monachemia is them finding their voice. You're a student at an alchemy academy, similar to Harry Potter school structure, but also a synthesis-obsessed RPG. Every character in your party has a dedicated story arc that you progress by spending time with them outside story missions. The relationship building is looser and warmer than Persona does it. Less gamified, more conversational. You seek out a character's episodes because you want to know what happens next, not because a system is telling you to optimize. The synthesis system is deeper and uses the Grow book, a web of item recipes where unlocking one opens adjacent ones, and character stats are raised by synthesizing specific items rather than by leveling up. You're what you make, literally. The character and the system are the same thing. The school setting, the character comedy, the way serious moments sneak in through a tone that never announces itself. This is one of the most charming games in its lineage. I played it immediately after Iris and put in twice the time. The character writing got me completely. The mid-game pacing is slow, though. Chapter structure can feel meandering between the character episodes, and not every chapter lands equally. But the ones that land, they stick. This is a game people discover and then can't stop recommending. Xenosaga was supposed to be 6 games. A complete philosophical science fiction saga built on ideas from Xenogears, asking questions about human consciousness, the nature of God, and what it costs humanity to survive its own worst impulses. Namco Bandai cut it to 3 episodes. Sales of the second had disappointed, and they didn't believe in the trilogy enough to see it through. This was made by a team that knew they were closing a story compressed far beyond its original scope. And somehow, against all reasonable expectation, they made it work. The entire endgame of a narrative that spans centuries of human history in a universe where the search for God has become a geopolitical reality. The game pulls these threads together, and the satisfaction isn't despite the shortening. It's partly because of it. The team made hard choices about what mattered and committed to them completely. The combat is the best in the trilogy mech battles, and individual character skills coexisting cleanly. The cutscenes are long and numerous, which for this series is a feature, not a problem. Summaries of the first 2 exist and are worth reading before you start. I replayed the final 5 hours immediately after finishing them, but it's a game that requires prior investment. Jumping straight into episode 3 without any context will be disorienting. The trilogy demands commitment, but the commitment pays. For a story that was never supposed to end the way it ended, it does so remarkably well. 20 years later, the journey is still worth making.
Huh?
The PS2 JRPG library produced enough content to fill years of playtime, and the critical conversation at the time covered maybe 5% of it. The rest sat in 2-paragraph reviews and Metacritic scores that have been sitting quietly for 20 years for someone to look past them. These games were there. They were doing interesting things. Which one of these did you play when nobody around you had heard of it? I genuinely want to know which ones found their audiences anyway. And if this kind of coverage is what you come here for, subscribing keeps me making it. It matters more than you'd think.